Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Helge Bjorland is CEO and co-founder of Globus, the software company harnessing AI to redefine the staffing industry. Founded by a team of data scientists in Oslo, Norway in 2017, Globus.ai is today a remote-first global company with a multicultural team at the forefront of the global workplace revolution. As well as founder and CEO, Helge is a data scientist and developer with extensive experience and passion for building AI products. Before starting Globus, he worked in several leadership and technical roles, holds a BSc in Business Administration and an MBA from Webster, as well as a BSc in Computer Science from the University of Stavanger. He's a passion for data science, a deep understanding of agile methodologies, and a hands-on knowledge of machine learning. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Helge Bjorland, welcome to Extrology podcast. Great to have you as my guest here today, and really looking forward to getting stuck into all things Globus, and in particular AI tech, the future, exciting times. But before we do so, for context, as is so often the case with all things Extrology, we like to start with the early days. So my first question, can you tell us about your childhood, where you grew up, and what were some of the fondest memories perhaps from that time?
Thank you. It's great to be on the podcast. Thanks for inviting me. And that's a long way back to remember. But yeah, I grew up in Norway, a small city in Norway called Sola, which means the sun. Not a lot of sun around here, so it doesn't make sense. But anyways, fondest childhood memory. That's quite a few. I don't know. Like, how far back do you usually go?
Whatever springs to mind. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah. I mean, what comes to mind is usually the experiences you had with family and friends. So I think that's kind of, and there are lots of them.
Have you a big family, siblings, brothers, sisters? What's the
I have a
background?
Sister. So not a big family, but both my mom and dad has a lot of sisters and brothers. So it's a large extended family.
Fantastic. And if you reflect back on that childhood to which you referred, were there particular role models or inspirations growing up? The kind of, the posters on your wall as a teenager. Who were those role models, and how did they impact your life?
I can't really remember like the role models as such. I remember my parents had a lot to contribute with when it came to, both my upbringing, but also helping me through school and assignments and all of that. So I think they were a good inspiration, and just, teaching me how to stick through, get things done, and kind of being organized.
What sort of things were you into as a kid? What subjects were you into? What's outside of school? What sort of things were you into?
Oh, I was quite nerdy. So it was, we had a James Bond club when I was back in elementary school. We were really obsessed with James Bond and like met once a week to watch his movies. And we were even on the radio interviewed one time because, we had this James Bond club going.
Interesting. Do you remember what was the first James Bond movie that you recall?
I don't know it's all the old classics like Dr. No and GoldenEye and like, yeah.
Fantastic.
So do you remember this Jaw guy with
Jaws,
with teeth?
Richard Keel was his name. He was something like 7 foot tall or something ludicrous. I don't know if that's the stuff of legend, but yeah, he had the wide teeth. You find him hugely intimidating, frightening character as a kid. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And what was it about the Bond phenomena, if you like, that caught that interest? Was it the kind of, there's an element of it, the excitement, and it's very compelling, is it? It's very adventurous. To your point, nerdy, I think was the word that you used, but there's the gadgets, there are all sorts of elements to Bond that there's a kind of, boy's own adventure type stuff to it.
Yeah, especially Q and the gadgets and everything. That's of course fascinating, and kind of started early as well with this gadget fascination, and got into tech. And my dad was he had a computer very early on. Both, do you remember the old Macs when it was just a screen and
Yes.
and then later on it became like a 486, like the really first home computers, like which with a bit more power to it. And that was interesting times. You had to log on to the internet with the ISDN, like yeah. Kids nowadays won't even know what we're talking about. So it's
So I'm of a different vintage, it's fair to say, than your good self. But so I remember the ZX Spectrum, ZX81, I think, then the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 32, Commodore 64. So I was in the days of, if you were loading games onto your screen, you were using a tape deck and a cassette to load your game, and you had exactly that, almost that dial-up type noise that then subsequently became internet dial-up.
Yeah.
We're talking gobbledygook to the vast majority, the audience, many of the audience today. There'll be some who will reflect back on those memories, but for many, it's kind of like, goodness me, it's like dinosaur technology, but it's really very much in living memory. It's really not that very long ago that was how we were engaging.
And the thing is, you had to figure everything out yourself. Yeah. Like, there was no internet. You couldn't Google it. Like, it was word of mouth, and you just had to figure out how everything worked. I remember a story with me and my friend. We were using my dad's computer, and of course he used it for work, right? And we were just home from school playing games and stuff. And then all of a sudden the screen goes black, and we couldn't figure out like how to get it to work again. Like it showed up when we restarted it. The DOS screen showed up, and then Windows, like everything went black. And this friend of mine, he knew a bit of DOS code. So he could help out. So he was like, yeah, I know what to do. Like, we'll just do the whole Windows folder. And he knew like del tree Windows. So he knew this command, and it just deleted the whole Windows folder. And, back then you had all these floppy disks to install. And we were like going through all the floppy disks, installing Windows again, and got it to work. And we were so happy. Like, Dad won't even notice. And then he came back home, and he's like, what happened to the computer? Like, you deleted the whole Windows, like everything, because all his work files were under the Windows, like Windows user, whatever, like everything was gone. And he had to like spend days to get, everything set back up with the internet and everything. Like, wasn't a quick install back then. So that was, took a while before I got to use his computer again.
Well, I was going to ask inevitably one of the questions that, as to childhood experiences that perhaps may have had a profound influence on you, and why. But it sounds as though from what you're saying, that initial intrigue into, and that's really interesting as well. The sense of, there is that almost naivete and the lack of fear in scenarios like that as a kid. It's kind of like, well, let's just try and fix it. Like, so you've got that, you haven't got any of that kind of bias that builds up, that predetermines what you can and can't do as a grown-up, but you've got that kind of sense of, well, let's just try and fix it, right? What do? We get a manual out. Do you recall when first you started? Was that the first instance you recall perhaps starting to take a real interest in technology and the role it was playing in our lives?
Yeah, I think like from the early days, just the fascination with games and what you could do and create web pages, how you can make code turn into something. Like it's fascinating, right? And then building your own computers, putting everything together, getting it to work, like, yeah, it's always been a fascination.
And were you hardware and software? So to your point, building your own computers, were you intrigued as to, were you the sort of child that was taking machines apart and pulling them back together again, rewiring them? Or was it more the software where your intrigue was really, and interest was really start to be inflamed?
A bit of both, but yeah, I think mostly software. The hardware part is more expensive and so on. So yeah, it's interesting putting your computer together and everything. But yeah, you do that once, right? And not every week.
So at what point did you start to, from an educational perspective, was there a point at which you started to think, there's the nub of what might start to look like a career choice down the route of technology and data science? All this, was there a sort of pivotal moment that started to influence that career choice?
There probably was, but I would say I probably still don't know what I'm gonna be, like the career path. I'm still not sure, but yeah, it's I think data science is closest to my heart, and I didn't know, like there was no data science when I was growing up, so I took a very traditional route, doing an MBA and kind of the business education, but more into finance, and my master's was like the paper was very technical with doing statistical analysis and stuff like that. And then I started working for Equinor. It's the biggest oil and gas company in Norway. And I quickly got into, like, I was very fascinated by all the Excel spreadsheets they made. And they did some really cool stuff with macros and stuff in the background. I'm like, oh, I need to learn how to program. So I then, while working, I got into engineering. I did an engineering degree as well. So learned how to code and did a new bachelor's over 3 years. And this was back when data science was just starting to pop up. So after working, I think like probably 5 or 6 years and moving around the company a bit, I saw all the potential that data science could have, and like really fascinated by how you could take a huge amount of data, quite unstructured, and kind of make a model that could predict stuff. I mean, that's really fascinating how you can get an output that's, yeah, wow, it works. You don't have to do all this manual coding and mapping and everything. You just train it on a massive amount of data. And it took quite a lot of convincing, and there was a lot of politics, but eventually I got the top management interested in this.
That's really intriguing. How did you get them interested?
Well, we did some initial use cases, which was promising. And then, yeah, I talked to a lot of people, and kind of, it took a while. So a lot of talking, a lot of PowerPoint presentations. And then I think at some point, a lot of them went to the US to learn from like other companies what they were doing, and they picked up on data science, and they remembered like, oh, this guy was talking about this just recently. Let's hear what he has to say. And I proposed like, okay, let me get some guys in the company together who is interested in this and has the right competence, and put together a data science center of excellence. And we'll work for 6 months, and we'll show you guys that this has a lot of potential. So I got the permission to do that, and that was really exciting. It was like a startup in this huge company, and we got the right people together, and basically ended up with 3 prototypes and proved the value of like 1.5 billion from these 3
Wow.
use cases. So yeah.
Which I would imagine then makes people who make these kind of decisions start to sit up and take notice when you can evidence that kind of value.
Yeah, exactly. It grew a lot bigger. So now it's quite a big part of Equinor.
That's an intriguing background, though, that you've gone down the route initially of and I had so many questions spinning out from that, but not least the MBA route. Where had the business interests? And I think you made mention of perhaps more of a finance influence to that, but business first and foremost. I want to come into then the engineering piece, because it's quite a skill set. You know, business, finance, engineering, coding, technical smarts. That you layer data onto that. You're building quite a foundation. Where had the business interests stem from first and foremost?
No, I think that's from the early days. I'm quite entrepreneurial. So yeah, worked in a shop from like, you know, aside from school, from probably like 15. And yeah, always liked working with people, selling stuff. Yeah, so the business part was, interested me from early on. Even while studying, I was studying in Thailand. So I did my degree there, and I noticed that, you know, belt buckles were really cheap in Thailand compared to everywhere else. So I met this guy there, and we went to Bangkok together. We bought a lot of belt buckles from the factories, and I hooked up the web shop, and we made this whole business together. just on the side while studying. So yeah.
It's interesting. So why what made you pick Thailand to study, other than the fact that it's a beautiful country? But why Thailand?
Well, my uncle had lived there for a while. He was a missionary. He's a priest, so he'd been living there for a while, and we'd visited. And just by coincidence, I saw an article in a magazine about a Norwegian guy studying at this university there. And this was at the time when I was looking for universities. I had applied in the UK, in Australia, in the US, like the very traditional choices. And then I'm like, Thailand, that seems perfect. Cost of living is low, and they have an American university, so you get the same kind of education. Wow, yeah, okay, I'm gonna reach out to this guy. So I just called him and talked to him, and it seemed perfect. So I applied.
So you've gotten this kind of business, natural entrepreneurial trait that's starting to feed through, seeing an opportunity, seizing an opportunity, which not least then feeds through to the work that you've done around building this data science proposition. But why coding? What was it about? You go back to that decision to pursue an engineering degree alongside that MBA, on top of that MBA. Why? What was the thought process? What had it been about that engineering space that had caught your intrigue and ignited that attention?
Well, I've kind of wondered the same thing sometimes myself. But one thing is this fascination of like how you can write a piece of code, and it can be useful, and like this learning from data, making models, like, but in coding itself, I think this feeling when you're in a flow state, you're writing code, it's a hard problem to crack, and then eventually you get it to run, and you get this immediate gratification because you see the result and it works. I think that's a really nice feeling, and you get that with coding. So yeah. That's part of it.
Interesting.
I don't know if you've done coding or if you know what I'm talking about.
But I certainly recognize that sense of when you're solving a complex issue or a problem and you actually find that solution. It's the dopamine hit that comes from that, right? It makes you feel good.
Yeah, and in some instances you have to wait years to see that it pans out and everything. But with coding, it's like it's these small problems. You have to like really rack your head around like how to solve it, and then you get it to work, and you're like, yes. And you look up on Stack Overflow, and someone else solved it better, and you're like, damn it.
But I guess if you reflected back on something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you looked at the layers that coding, I never thought of it quite this way, but if you look at the layers through which you're achieving that need that coding is fulfilling, and actually the sense of satisfaction that's derived at the end, I could see why that would be really compelling. I have a question for you, naive question, which, given the success that you've enjoyed in data science and clearly the lack of education I have around that space, the one thing that's always fascinated me is that the sheer volume of data. If you're working in, for example, a huge oil organization business, the volume of data that just swims through that organization, any organization, on a daily basis it strikes me, is vast. It must just be so. However you cut through the noise to really focus in on what's the really meaningful data that will inform the levers that we can pull that will really enhance performance or whatever metric, whatever it is that you're looking to influence. But how do you cut through the noise? That's always the thing that has intrigued me about the work that as a data scientist you might do, is that ability to get to what really matters when there's so much. How do you do that?
Mm-hmm. Big question. I'm just going to start by saying like this big data thing that was, it was a huge problem actually. When they do this, when they're mapping the sea bottom, like doing this surveying, they run boats and they have all these sensors and running across the sea bottom. And I think it generated like 500 gigabytes per minute or something, like huge amounts of data. And this was coming in, and like they had to just like, you couldn't store it all. So you had to like just pick parts of it or have some kind of a logic to get the most important parts out. So it was definitely a problem with huge amounts of data. But when it comes to like sifting through it and like figuring out what's important or not, I think for data science, there's a process called CRISP-DM. So usually it all starts with defining the business problem. And I think that's also where, my background and what I think is important as a data scientist as well is understanding the business as well as the technical aspect, because it all starts with defining the problem, understanding the business side of it, and then figuring out like, okay, what makes sense here logically? And then, okay, how can I translate that to features or the data I need and so on to solve that problem? So it's this combination of both sides, which I think is important, at least initially, to solve the problem.
And how much of an advantage, therefore, is it that you had that, going back to what we already discussed, but you had that business focus around the MBA, you've got the engineering smarts around the coding, the data capability from a mathematical and scientific perspective. You've got all of those layers that you're feeding through. How much of an advantage, seems an obvious question, but if arguably even a leading question, but how much of an advantage might that have been, do you think?
I think it's a huge advantage, just kind of both communication skills. So you're able to explain your ideas in a simple way. That kind of helps getting things through the system and allows you to work on what you want to do. And of course, understanding the business and what's important, what gives value, what doesn't. Like, don't spend time building a model if you can do it with rules, if that makes sense. Like, just use the simplest solution that gives value to the business. You don't want to spend half a year building a super advanced neural network just because you can. That doesn't make sense. So, it's very important to understand the business side of things.
Which leads me into Globus and the story behind it. So I want to I've got so many questions around Globus and around all sorts of other things pertaining to AI and the place in which that finds itself in the world now. But first and foremost, what's the story behind Globus? Where did the nub of an idea really stem from? And it was, am I right in thinking 2017 that you launched? So if you go and reflect back, what was the inspiration? What was the story behind it?
Well, we were several founders and we all worked together in Equinor.
Right.
So, we had this data science group. We've been working together. We saw the potential that AI had in lots of different settings. But, one of the things that really inspired us and what we wanted to do was make an impact. So, you get to a point in life where you're like, oh, I really want to do something that matters, leave something behind. You get kids and you start reflecting on these things. This was at the same time when the Sustainable Development Goals was kind of coming into play. And we're like, how can we contribute? We don't know much about cleaning the ocean or how to improve the pollution in the air or anything like that. But at least we know AI, it must be useful in many of these cases.
And what was, as we, if we look at the headlines around AI as it exists today, whether it's for in layman's terms, we might reflect on something, people that might have used ChatGPT or Bard or any of the kind of, so how we perceive AI, I think it's a really interesting, even just the phrase artificial intelligence, I think is quite an intriguing phrase. But going back to 2015, 16, 17, what did AI look like then?
Well, you still had machine learning, you had advanced statistics, and I think the AI term is kind of overarching. Like, you have different kinds of machine learning. Like, it gets very practical when you break it down. Very often AI, people associate it with anything machines can't do yet. So, self-driving cars was AI before there was self-driving cars. And now it's like, oh, that's not AI. But when you break it down, it's like, it's machine learning. It's learning from data, making models that then can predict some future state. So it's very simple. And that's been the case, and AI has had several peaks and it's been the same practical application of it or.
And you
Did
mentioned
that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it does. Because I think there's a lot of hysteria around it. I guess at the moment, it's very much the talk of the day that we're all going to be. This is the end of the human race. We're all going to be taken over by machines, and like I say, it's hysterical because it generates eyeballs and clicks and all those sorts of things. But actually, really understanding. Let's get serious about this. What is it? What does it do? To your point, machine learning and the applications of models to inform better decisions and better outcomes, it strikes me as something that's of huge value. You mentioned you saw the potential. Were there different paths and rabbit holes down which you scurried to kind of explore, well, we could do this. There are lots of different options you were looking at before you hit upon Globus as being the solution that you wanted to pursue.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was, we were talking to a lot of, what's it called? Like Red Cross and Children's Aid, like these
right. Yeah.
organizations like
NGOs
this.
and that sort of thing that was, yeah. Okay.
We even went to Bangladesh to see like the refugee camps and like, what can we do there? We were searching a lot for opportunities, talking to customers and following the principle of like the Google, I think, advocated like this simple startup idea. Like you just get going with the idea without like building everything from scratch. So actually we signed up for a conference with a PowerPoint presentation and we had a stand. And we're like, yeah, this is what we have. And it was something very generic. And then just trying to get the first customer before we even had anything.
And what was it you were presenting? What was the nature of that PowerPoint?
I think it was AI for operational excellence, something like that. We can do anything.
And had you, because there's always that argument, is that you pick a niche and you drive a wedge a mile deep. What you don't want to be is a mile wide, because then you're all things to all people, right? But you pick your niche, but it sounds like what you were describing is, well, we can do anything. I guess then, therefore, the problem is from a customer perspective. So how you can do anything, but how does that help us, right? So we've got this very specific problem. So was that an issue you encountered?
Definitely, and kind of what we started out with most customers was a exploratory workshop,
right,
to understand their problem. And so we did that. We were very clear on that we were building software. So we were not a consultancy. We were building software and kind of we were looking for a solution. But we ended up building 3 or 4 different products to begin with. So yeah, it was definitely a searching time there around 2017, 18. We didn't know exactly what to do. We knew AI and that can be useful in a lot of different aspects. But we had this... we had the vision part, we wanted it to make an impact, and we knew AI. So it's like, okay, we made it a bit more difficult for ourselves, but yeah, we wanted to combine those two, definitely.
So what made you pick recruitment? It's always struck me, it's a huge space. It's a huge global industry. I think oftentimes the part that's downplayed is if you look at the big decisions that you make in life, if we cut aside the marriage, children, buying houses, whatever, the really big stuff that we would put from a personal perspective to the top of the list, I think the part around changing jobs or finding a new job often gets missed as kind of it's a big decision, right? For most people, most of the time, the decision to change jobs and accept a new role is an enormous undertaking. Psychologically, the stress it imparts, the emotions that you'll ride, it's a big decision. And it's often struck me that from a business perspective, recruitment is there is no other business process, I would argue historically, that if gotten wrong is so costly, but yet is left to chance in quite such the same way as hiring.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like everyone's wrestling with this, well, how do you fix it? How do you get it right? And yet there are so many shades of grey when it comes to people. It's never quite black and white. It fascinates me that you picked hiring as the problem to solve. And I guess, therefore, my first question is why?
So imagine like you have the SDGs. It's really difficult problems to solve, right? And then you're looking at the other aspect of it. You have a lot of people they're depressed. They're falling outside of the workforce. They're not happy in their job. They're going to work just to make money. And then I'm here in a job kind of with a totally different feeling. I'm doing something I love. I don't even look at it as a job. So that's very different. And the things you can achieve in that kind of a situation compared to this kind of other situation, which to me seems a bit more depressing, like you're just going to make a living to live life. But yeah, so I think that's where we kind of went back and forth and saw that, okay, if we can impact how we match people with opportunities and get people in the right place so that they're motivated to contribute, to develop, imagine how we can solve the big problems in the world. That's how we can improve quality of life. So both for the individual, but also as a society, that's, you get people where they're needed and you solve the big problems. So it's not something we're solving right away, but it's definitely like in the space of how do you understand a person, their interests, their motivations, their experiences, and connect them with the right opportunities that will motivate them and kind of get the best out of them. And that's a pretty huge problem to solve.
Absolutely. I suspect, and this isn't based on any factual evidence that I can instantly recall, but I suspect if you spoke to any CEO, if you asked them to list their top 5 challenges in varying degrees of order, but recruitment, talent, attraction, retention, development, whatever, it will feature in some way, shape or form. People will feature in some way, shape or form in just about every one of their top 5s, I would imagine. So it is a huge problem.
And it's so expensive to get it wrong.
So expensive to get it wrong.
I mean, it's been done the same way for years and years.
Yeah, this is my point around it's left to chance, right?
Yeah.
I remember there was some research out of Harvard done years ago around the cost of mishire. And it was something like, depending on where a person sits within an organization, it was anywhere between 2.7 and 54 times salary in terms of the implications of getting it wrong. And I believe the example of the 54 times salary was if you're, for example, an S&P 500, you hire your CEO and you get it wrong, the impact on your market cap 54 times that person's salary is not incomprehensible. But even employing someone on an average wage and getting that wrong, the implication is 2.7 times that salary as to the financial impact on the organization of getting it wrong. And I think you then, there is some degree of ability to measure the cost implication from a corporate perspective. But I think you then, the intangible measurement that you couldn't necessarily apply to the individual of being in the wrong job. I mean, what an incredibly miserable experience for someone who is going to a place every day, who may not feel like they have a choice, but that is turning up somewhere every day, is utterly disenfranchised, disengaged, discouraged, but doesn't feel like they have a choice. I mean, that's tough, right? Because most people will spend more time doing this thing we call work than arguably anything else. To be desperately unhappy doing it has such a negative impact on health and well-being, on a million and one different measurements we could apply. And that has arguably, for me, I think, even more concerning implications. So the fact that you're trying to address this is an enormous undertaking, it strikes me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, we have to break it down. But yeah, it is a big task, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. You have the psychological, you have the tangible experience, and yeah, a lot of different facets. But it's, if you think about it, you have the resume. I've told you a bit about my past. If you wanted to check any of that, you would have to go and find some people that I worked with and just ask them. There's no record of me and what kind of skills I've built up, or like it's all just verbal communication relaying that information. So yeah, it's definitely ripe for disruption, kind of the way we're doing this.
I also think the resume is an interesting one because whilst clearly it will give an indication of trajectory, capability, motivation, past performance is no guarantee of future success. And so again, I think you're right. We've got this kind of historically, so we're comfortable with the concept of the resume. It globally, people go, yeah, that's how we hire in most cases. But it is still open to abuse. It's open to interpretation. It's open to bias, unconscious bias. It's open to 1,000,001 different fundamental flaws. So you really are tackling, in my view, something that really needs to be addressed. But it's a huge problem. Where do you even start? How do you even get started?
Yeah, to me, from a data science perspective, the way to get started is you need data and you need structured data. Somehow you need to find that, because that's when you can, like, as a person, as a recruiter, I can maybe keep 20, 30 candidates top of mind, and remember, if it 100, thousands, like, that's impossible. So if you want to look at this from a big perspective and understand, how statistically people could fit into a job and who looks the same and all of this, you need to get data somehow. So that's kind of where we started. When we were doing these prototypings, like the use cases back in Equinor, one of the really interesting cases was being able to put together teams that were to work on the platforms based on previous incidents. So kind of putting teams together with different kind of experiences and who would work best together so that you could reduce incidents. And yeah, because obviously you don't want people to, there were deaths and it's big machinery and everything. So yeah, how do you put people together in teams to reduce that risk? And the data was just not there. It's like, it's unstructured. It's just text in text fields. It's very hard to work with, and it's captured in different systems. And I think a lot of organizations will recognize this when it comes to HR. It's very unstructured, and it's, one part is the CV, and then, you're jumping between different tasks that you're doing, but that's not registered anywhere. That's your leader who knows what you're doing, or your manager. So everything's a bit fragmented. And in addition to that, people don't switch jobs that often. So you don't have that many data points to go by. So when we started looking into this, like, where do we start? Like, how do we get the data for this? We got in touch with Dedicare, which is one of the largest healthcare staffing provider in the Nordics. And, we got in touch with them and like, where are you struggling? What are you doing? And we saw that you guys are dealing with high volume staffing. So you actually place people on a daily basis into shifts. Like, oh my God, you have a lot of data on each individual and what they're doing and what kind of competence. And like, wow, we can use this. So that's really where we saw that, okay, in this industry, that's a really good starting point because we can use AI. We have the data to start with. And I'm
always intrigued when I'm talking with anyone who's been through that startup journey. Was there a kind of eureka moment? It sounds as though from what you've described, that point at which you thought, hey, we're onto something here. We've got our theories and our kind of mission and vision and what we think we can achieve. But actually, here's a point at which we have a viable business proposition here. Was that point, or was there another moment where you thought, hey, we're really onto something?
Yeah, this was the point. We had a meeting with Mattis, the CTO, and he took a meeting with us. He was interested in new technology, and I think when we dived into how they were working and understood the problem, and the way they're doing it is pretty much manual today. Of course, they have their ATS system where they register candidates and so on, and assignments which candidates are doing, but from the order is received, it's basically comes in through email or they receive it in a VMS system. Then they have to manually go in and search for candidates. Very often the data quality is poor. So the whole, it takes a lot of time. So the business case was definitely there. Like, if we can automate this process, there is a huge value to be gained for the staffing agencies. For us, the data was there. So we could build AI from it to do that automation. And in addition, it was in healthcare. So that really fit well with our vision. I think on general, the staffing agencies are doing an important job, just getting people into the workforce, upskilling, reskilling, helping, newly educated people into jobs. But yeah, it was especially motivating for us since it was healthcare. So yeah.
And I guess that fitted quite neatly with your point around legacy and that initial discussion around or with NGOs and looking at kind of purpose and what's behind it. But to your point around healthcare, I know it seems an obvious thing to say, but talent in healthcare, capability, expertise in healthcare is literally critical, isn't it? So, you get it wrong, there are all sorts of awful implications we won't go into. But so you're thinking there is, as a founder group, hey, look, healthcare is an area where there's enormous demand, tremendous need. It's worthwhile. There's a lot of worth to what people in that space are delivering, understandably. And we've got some tech smarts that we can really make this process way more efficient, way more effective, and deliver far smarter outcomes for everybody involved. Is that? I may just have butchered the Globus proposition, but that's kind of where it's stemming from.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's very obvious in healthcare because, if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, you help patients. So that's an obvious impact. But I think in any profession, if you place a person in the right place, it definitely have these, what do you call it? Like the ring effect, ripple effects,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you impact that person, but that definitely has an impact on their immediate family, which impacts society. So, I mean, it's a very big positive impact of being able to connect the person with the right opportunities.
I'm interested, just going back to your collective. So, there are three of you that were founders. That's correct? One of the things that always intrigues me. This may seem a trite question, but I'm always intrigued nonetheless by the response. Is when you're looking. When I think there's much to be, and all the evidence would support the beauty of being part of a founder group and having that kind of shared sense of direction and purpose and challenge, and just being able to share in the challenges along the way. How do you determine who does what? Now, I'd imagine that you go back to the three of you working in that data science team. I would imagine there was a degree of similarity to skill set that you're all bringing to the table. So how do you sit down and determine, right, who's gonna take what seat?
Yeah, I remember that was, I think it was in my living room, like at home we were meeting. We were 4 founders to begin with. So it's always like this, all right, how do we, roles and responsibilities, who does what? And I don't know, I had managed this data science group, which they'd been part of. So maybe it seemed natural, but I remember in the beginning, it's like, I was thinking, yeah, I'd love to take the CEO role, but yeah, you have to tread lightly and like feel your way around. Like, yeah, does anyone else want to do that? And yeah. And for that, I think they quickly kind of just told me like, yeah, you do that. No one else was trying to advocate for that. And our CTO was quite obvious. And we had Jan, he loves talking to people. He is a very good, he's a people person, and he's done sales before, both sales and technical management of teams. But yeah, he had been doing a lot of sales. So that was kind of obvious. And Håkon was also a lot into like both the business sides and the technical aspects, but he just loved like, how do you implement this with customers? And I remember like going with him to customers and all the recruiters on the floor. And when he comes into the room, they're like, Håkon, you're there, and hugging him. And like, wow, you're really making an impression with people. That's so yeah, it was a very good match of like in a founder group. So quickly fell into place, like what our strengths were and what roles we were meant to have, basically.
Interesting. I think it's to your point. If you're all too similar, if there aren't distinct flair and capability and expertise, and there's a common sense of purpose and values, but in the middle, but around that, there's the different skill sets you're bringing to the table. Then it kind of lends itself very naturally to an accelerated success within that team. But I suspect if you're too closely aligned, you end up stepping on each other's toes. It sounds like from the dynamic you've imparted, you've shared with us that it's a really, really effective group. And in those early days, were there any particular challenges that really stood out for you? And if so, how perhaps did you overcome them?
I think there were a lot of challenges, but we kind of expected there to be, especially with 4 founders, with all of us having quite strong personalities. So what we did to begin with was we kind of worked through different scenarios and just agreed how to make decisions. So that was one part of it. But we also, like from the get-go, agreed on why are we doing this? What's the vision of this company? And I think if you have that foundation, which you stick with, then it also makes decision-making easier. So we wanted to improve quality of lives, and it took a while to get down to that definition. But yeah, that's still the vision of the company. And once you have that, you can compare or look at every decision and say, does it fit with our vision of the company? And it makes things easier. So we did that to begin with, had that discussion, and kind of found the common why. I don't know if you read this book, Start With Why.
Is that the Simon Sinek
It's the Simon Sinek.
Simon
Yeah.
book,
And
yes. Yes,
really
I have.
interesting video as well.
A long time ago, yeah.
If you search this on YouTube, you can find his old TED Talk. And
yes, that's where I've certainly seen the TED Talk, but not for some time. But that whole understanding your why, I think, is a really interesting concept.
Yeah. And I think that helped us as well when we talked to staffing agencies, coming into meetings, with a young company, we didn't have much of a track record other than what we'd done in the past. But just starting to talk about why we're doing this. We want to be part of what you're doing because we think it's great that you give people opportunities, you help them develop. We want to be part of that and help you guys. You come in from a totally different angle than saying we have this model, machine learning model, Yeah.
Did you meet any resistance to your point? It's machine learning. How do you combine the sense that, absolutely fundamentally recruitment is a process, but it's a very human process, which we've already identified. So how do you align that vision that you have around improving quality of lives, which is of itself a very human vision? You don't need my endorsement, but absolutely it is. And I commend you for that. But versus for want of a better expression, but nonetless, I'm going to use it, accusation that, machine learning is inhuman. Mm-hmm. And how do you align those, ensure that you continue to pursue that very human vision against the accusation that AI feels like a slightly inhuman tool or application?
Yeah, so AI can be used for prediction or, decision support. And to me, I think recruiters will definitely have a place in the future as well, because they're dealing with the human aspect. So the human-to-human relations is important, and I think it will be for the foreseeable future. But all the manual, mundane tasks, putting data into systems and kind of figuring out what kind of competences people have and so on, those kind of things, machines can do a lot better than people. Mm. So the combination of the two, I think, is what will drive this industry forward.
And why is that? Is that because, not to make an assumption, but it's something that strikes me is that the machine cuts through. Yeah, I remember some fascinating workshops I've attended around unconscious bias.
Yeah.
And I think, is it fair to assume that that machine learning cuts through that? So it prevents those, and I think those natural barriers that we have as human beings around our own experiences that we might, with the very best of intentions, do our utmost to try and cut through, but are kind of hardwired into a lot of the ways in which we might think. The machine cuts through that, right? And it just deals with the facts, it just deals with the data, it just deals with what is.
Exactly. So, and that can be positive and it can be negative. I don't know if you remember this case where, I don't remember the company, but they made this facial recognition thing for doorbells or opening doors. Really cool, but it only recognized white people. So there was, when colored people came to open the door, wouldn't let them in because it didn't recognize them. And it was because the training data set just was very biased in itself.
Interesting. So how do you overcome that? Because I guess the data is only good as the input of that data.
Exactly. So yeah, it's very it takes the data and you can train a model based on it, but you have to make sure the training data itself is not biased. So that's always something to be aware of when you're doing these kind of things, and why you need a process to clean the data, to understand the data and everything. But on the positive side, yes, it's very objective. If you have taking those considerations to begin with, it is very objective and it can help reduce the unconscious biases that recruiters have. So highlighting candidates that they wouldn't think of otherwise, or that wouldn't get a fair chance in another setting. You can hide name, you can hide age, you can do a lot of interesting things to remove all that unconscious bias and make a more fair hiring decision.
I think the thing that struck me is back to your use of the phrase machine learning, I think is really intriguing, because I think artificial intelligence doesn't quite, for me, define. Machine learning seems a very much more appropriate terminology, because the machine is learning from the information that's being imparted. It's developing its process. It's evolving based on what we're able to inform it. And you're constantly sense checking the integrity of that data and the the lack of bias within that data, although you're testing that rigorously, and the machine is learning and evolving its capability as a consequence. It therefore strikes me machine learning is a far better phrase than it isn't an artificial intelligence. It's a machine that is learning based on what it is being taught from us as humans. I think people are scared by the phrase artificial intelligence. It's kind of the Terminator scenario, right?
It's something you don't understand.
The machines are taking over, but that's not it at all, is it? I mean, it's a very much. Is that fair? Am I making ill-informed judgments around?
It is very logical. Machine learning probably makes more sense in that way. And then, I don't want to create any fair scenarios or anything, but when ChatGPT came out, I think the people making it was surprised, because when you look at machine learning, it's statistics. You're taking a bunch of words and you're looking at similarities and kind of doing some math and then kind of figuring out what's the next most probable word. And then they took this 1.3 billion documents or whatever, and then kind of trained it on that. And then all of a sudden they're getting these results that are like, what? This is incredible. How is it? You don't really understand how you understand the logic of it, but the fact that it's this good, that was unexpected. And that's kind of what has sparked this whole huge trend right now. But we're definitely, development is going fast, and there is a lot of things that we don't understand necessarily how everything works or why it works the way it does. So there is that aspect to it.
I think the other thing that really intrigues me about Globus is, as an organization, you're very much at the forefront, quite literally, of what I would determine is a revolution in this thing we call work. Because if I reflect back on, the genie is well and truly out of the bottle from a remote working perspective. COVID has changed the dynamic. There are all sorts of organizations, just about every organization I feel, are wrestling with this concept of what work is. Once upon a time, it was a place we went to do something. And for some people, that will continue to be true. You couldn't, for example, be a neurosurgeon, I suspect, and work from home currently. You'd need to be in an operating theatre. So there are some jobs that require of you to be at that place called work. But for many jobs, we don't anymore. And I think I'm right in saying that Globus is a remote first global. You have a global footprint and you have a remote first approach to talent and work and your workforce, which is wonderful. Lots of organizations that could do that are still wrestling with this. No. We have an office or a whatever it is, a place we go to, and if I can't see my people in that place, I don't know that they're working, and that scares me. So there's a lot of organizations really wrestling with work, how we manage performance management. Are we measuring outcomes versus historically we were measuring presenteeism? There's all sorts of these debates going on globally, it strikes me. And yet you've managed to, you're building a very successful business with a great workforce, a lot of talent, a lot of capability, but utterly remote first. And there are people I know that would say, well, how are you doing that? What does that mean in terms of mission, vision, values, purpose, that sense of engagement from your employees? Are they just doing a job because they're in another part of the world, you don't get to see anyone? There are all these sorts of debates that I think that people will be going through people's minds. And yet here you are with a wonderful group of people, really excited, really engaged, doing great things all over the world. How are you doing it?
Yeah, we're definitely remote first. We're in 15 different countries, not having an office there, but we have people in 15 different countries. So we definitely hire where the competence is, not where we have offices. And that's been an interesting journey as well, where we figured we have to live what we believe will be the future work. So we ended up with that model. And of course, it has its pros and cons, but we definitely have to brag a bit about our team, but it's an amazing team. I mean, when ChatGPT just came out, we quickly turned around and got that implemented into Globus in record time. So we're the only one, and I think still the only one who has this implemented in the product for high volume staffing agencies, and just getting better. And so in the forefront, and a remote team who's just doing an amazing job of kind of creating new innovations every day. But what my hopes are at least is that everyone feels something related to the vision that we have, like they want to be part of that, which is important. Because that's something we also check a lot in the recruitment process, that, people are aligned with our vision and that makes sense to them.
I guess then, therefore, how you wrestle with things like time zones, for example. That strikes me, if you're in 15 countries, I should imagine that perhaps from a leadership perspective, that might mean that you're online at odd times of the day and night in order that you're available to deal with issues or be on hand to deal with things that your staff are wrestling, your people are wrestling with. Is that a problem? How do you overcome issues like that? Or am I just I'm imagining something, the problem doesn't actually exist?
It could probably be a problem for individuals, but what we did was, like, you can of course do a lot of things asynchronously. You can record things, you can use Teams, and kind of, you don't always need to be in meetings at the same time. But what we did as well was just define a core time in Central European time where, people have to be available at these times, so that you at least know when you can call people for a meeting and not. And so that's how we solve the time zone problem. But people are working a lot of different times. There was, people all over. So at some point, they might be working in the afternoon and or the evening, and but then they find a way to deal with that and work with that rhythm. So
So what excites you about the future for Globus?
I think now, with what we're seeing in terms of developments within AI, things are going faster than ever. There's, VC money is just pouring into this industry. So we'll see a lot of developments, and just being able to be in that, in the forefront of this and seeing what's going on, being hands-on with this kind of new technology and helping the staffing industry adopt it. I think that's really interesting and motivating. So for Globus, we have a lot of things on our roadmap. The product will get better, and I think just seeing the adoption of the product with users and the joy and aha moments that we can create. Because sometimes we get into meetings and when users experience firsthand, they're like, "What? I didn't even know this was possible." And just experiencing that is quite amazing. So
So what is it that excites you about where AI is heading?
Ooh, that's a big topic. I mean, it depends what time scale you're talking about, where we're headed. Imagine when we're on civil salaries and, you can do whatever you want. If you want to open a coffee bar, you do that, or, whatever. You're provided for anyways. There's an abundance, so you don't need to do anything. But imagine that kind of future. If AI can help us get there, that's very interesting. And on the way there, I think we'll see a lot of different, both positive aspects of it, but also challenges. Imagine the workforce now, how many people it will displace, but also how many new jobs it will create. So the demand for understanding skills and roles and how you can use people in different places, how you should upskill them and reskill them, and how do you take care of your people? You can't rely on your college education anymore, university and education. You need to continuously be learning. So that's it's a new scenario for everyone, and you need to find new ways of tackling that. So I think that's going to be a big challenge. It's going to lead to a lot of positive things. But on the short term or midterm time range, it's also going to be huge challenges with that.
But I think even if we reflect back earlier, you mentioned the phrase that when first you started out in a corporate career, data scientist wasn't a job, right? So I think that and yet I think most of us listening here today would agree that, we all know what a data scientist, or at least we recognize the term as a career choice. But arguably 20 years ago, it didn't exist. There will be jobs going into the future that we possibly can't even comprehend sitting here today, that will become commonplace.
Yeah,
I remember there was an article that has always struck me in the Sunday Times newspaper here in the UK. It would have been about 2009, 10. It was post the global financial crisis. And the basic premise of the article was that by 2050, nurses would be paid more than bankers. And the argument within the article was that anything that could, in the terminology of the time, but anything that could be delivered by algorithm in some way, shape or form would become of less value and there will be less of them. So the argument was there'll be far fewer bankers. There might be some very elite ones, but there'll be far fewer people. Banking will become just a process administered by administrators processing that process. I've butchered that phrase. But that what we will start to do is place more value on the career choices that machines couldn't replicate. So, for example, caring, nursing, social care, waiting tables, cutting hair, whatever it might be, things that at that point they were surmising that machines wouldn't be able to deliver. But dealing with complex derivatives, well, that's machines, right? They can sort that out. So it's really interesting that I think that where the future heads, I think that article arguably was quite kind of crystal ball gazing, quite clever in terms of sort of the direction of travel. Now, we've not yet really seen that because quite clearly nurses aren't paid more than bankers, certainly not in the UK. But you can see the direction of travel that, to your point, I was fascinated at your reference there to civil salary, that we will get to a point where machines will generate wealth for nations, that nations will then subsequently put back into its people, and then the people will decide and make choices based on what intrigues or interests them. Opening a coffee shop, whatever you want to do. That seems like I can see pluses and minuses, but that sounds like a utopian vision for where possibly we could head.
Yeah, I would definitely find a lot of interesting things to do still.
Similarly.
Yeah.
It's scary for some people, I guess, because some people think, well, I do this. Some people define themselves by their career choice, don't they? So I am a whatever.
Yeah.
And if that gets taken away from me, what does that mean for me? And what's my purpose then? And where does my life take me? That's quite scary for an awful lot of people. And I guess that's what drives a lot of the fear around what AI could do.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting also this, like before ChatGPT, I think a lot of ideas were centered around the blue collar workers would be the first ones to be replaced. Self-driving cars or trucks would revolutionize the logistics and put a lot of people out of work, or remove taxi drivers. And, in warehouses, you'd have robots doing the packing and everything. And all of a sudden you get this shift and you see that, oh my God, like white collar jobs are the ones that will be replaced first because ChatGPT and the results you're getting from these kind of AI models. So it's definitely been a shift. And I think people had to rethink. So yeah, this article was probably ahead of its time and seeing that trend early on. But it's it will be interesting. It's just like in recruitment. It's I think you'll still have the human aspect, human to human interactions, but the daily tasks will definitely change. It will require new kind of competencies from the recruiters. So yeah.
Well, I reflect back on, on the best recruiters I've ever worked with historically have been those that have been obsessive around data and the integrity of that data and the coding of that data to ensure that when they were presented with a process, they weren't missed. There was no chance they were going to miss anything unique or specific about an individual that might mean they might miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
And frankly, those with that approach would have been in the minority. So the fact that you can automate a lot of that data and analysis of that data now it's a game changer. I mean, it's hugely exciting.
I think it's interesting because a lot of people don't realize, if you put in better data, you get better results. And very often they go back to the old way of working and just like, I'll do this faster because I just do it right away. I call this candidate or I look it up, whatever. But if you just take the time to add the data correctly, like you can scale it, you can do it better. So we spent a lot of time when building Globus as well, kind of helping the users understand that if you add the right kind of data elements, like this will improve over time, because there's definitely a reinforcement loop in there. So if the recruiters use the system, we pick up on what they do and then we learn from that and kind of gets better over time.
And I think that, if I look at my own experiences of utilizing AI-driven tools capability, but what I'm finding is the data reinforms. I think there's huge value in and I think I'm right in saying there's some science to support this, but the intuitive sense of gut feel that we enjoy as human beings is informed by our own experiences through our lives, right? And there's I believe there's some science and data now that might support that perspective, driven by, millions of years of evolution. And that sense of that feeling that we get in the pit of our stomach when we're fearful that something is probably because there was a saber-toothed tiger around the corner that's just about to jump on us is informing some of those decisions. But I think that how we're using data, what it's doing is it's applying a level of rigor over that gut feel that historically we didn't enjoy. And that becomes a really powerful and compelling proposition.
I like this example with how doctors combined with AI for reading X-ray images. They did a study where they looked at the results and accuracy that you get from an AI is a certain level, right? The accuracy that you get from only the doctor looking at the X-ray is at a certain level, quite comparable. But if you combine those two, if you have the AI identifying the regions that are, looks risky or it highlights parts of it, and then a doctor looks at it, you just blow the accuracy out of that really improves the system. So this combination of the two, that's what makes it good.
What other technologies are you excited by?
One of the things that has been said quite a lot is that AI can't be creative. So we'll never see it replacing painters or songwriters or things like that. They're like, we're safe. Technology can't be creative. And now you have tools like Midjourney, and you have tools to create songs and just from a prompt. I mean, and it turns out so good. Imagine Midjourney. Before you had to hire a model, you had to hire the photographer, you had to find a location. It takes a lot of time. It's quite costly. And now I write one prompt and I get an image that looks so realistic of a person. I can use it in my marketing materials or wherever I want. I mean, this is a total game changer. And if you look at, I don't know if you've used Midjourney, if you look at Discord,
I haven't, no.
Where people are you can see what everyone types, the prompts and the results they're getting. And it's just, you can just sit and look at it for hours. It's fascinating. I think what you have today is that you start with the end. So before you had to do a lot of work to get to that first initial image. Now you write a prompt, you get that first initial image, and you can start iterating from there. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
So the development is you're just leapfrogging the whole beginning that you had to deal with before. You had to go into Photoshop, you had to do all this work, and now you write a prompt, you get to the ending, and you start working from there. So imagine what that means for development and how quickly we can progress things. It's amazing.
It's an incredible time. I suspect this period, I've uttered this before, but this period of history will be studied in the same way that we might have studied this, the Industrial Revolution, this technological revolution, and the pace of change is just so fast, so phenomenal, so exciting. Again, can be scary for some, but it's just a great time to be alive. I think in terms of that technological innovation that we're witnessing, it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
You asked about what other technology, but I think in health, that's also another area which I'm very fascinated by. And kind of how long are we going to live? That's because we're kind of on the cusp of a lot of things happening. And imagine in biology with this kind of AI technology, how rapidly it can come up with new medicine, new cures, all of these kind of things. So when you can do, you can rejuvenate cells, you can kind of... you can print organs, all of these things that we can do. How long can you extend the lifespan? And I've talked about this for years. So my friends are I just turned 40, and they're like, oh yeah, most people are halfway through their life, but I guess you're just 1/4 through your life.
Well, do you know, I had a conversation with my nieces who are aged 9 and 11, 10 and 12. And my sister is their mum, my sister who's 5 years younger than me. We'd had a discussion around how much, of course, you're a lot older, Uncle Lee, than mummy and blah, 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 blah. I said, yeah, but here's the interesting thing. Even though I'm older than your mum, I'm going to live longer than her. They said, really? I said, well, don't get me wrong, I don't want your mum to be going anywhere anytime soon. Of course not. But I'm 51. So the conversation has centered around, at the time I was 50, I remember saying, well, I'm going to live till I'm 100. And how exciting do you think that makes me feel, knowing that I'm only halfway through? I've got half of my life still to come. Now, yeah. I thought that for the longest time. Clearly, there are a million and one things that could happen that might mean that doesn't come true. But I do think that I reflect back now on, how science and health technology has evolved to the extent where, I recall my father's 50th. I'm lucky that he's still very much a big part of my life. But, I remember when my father was 40, I was 16. I remember thinking, crikey, 40. Like that's so old. Like, and it's partly because my grandparents weren't living much beyond 60s, 70-ish.
Yeah, exactly.
That was kind of life expectancy. But now, my parents are well into their 70s, and, I hope they'll live long beyond that. They enjoy good life, good health. They're very fortunate, admittedly, and I know that many don't, but you sort of think we're all living longer. How exciting are all these advancements that are only going to encourage that further?
Exactly, yeah. Of course, it comes with a lot of challenges as well, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic.
So I'm a huge believer, perhaps somewhat naively, but that the human will prevail. When we start to address issues like climate change or global warming, I'm a huge believer in the science the ability of the intellectual capacity of the human being to survive and develop solutions and create solutions and think around these problems. And I just believe, perhaps, as I say, I'm a glass half full person, but that we'll find a way, because we always do and we always have. Now that may be naive, and I imagine there'll be lots of people who would pick holes in that, but I'm a great believer in the human spirit.
I think so as well. I'm a technology optimist and believe in a bright future. Yeah, usually prevail. But of course, everyone needs to do their part, and you can make an impact. I think in terms of climate change and everything, people might feel a bit powerless, but there are actually a lot of things you can do, and yeah.
I'm hugely excited by the innovation that is out there and what could be achieved. But I mean, coming back to that sort of life and future and all that sort of good stuff for yourself, do you have outside of work, when you're not dealing with these hugely exciting but nonetheless complex challenges around technology and AI, what are your passions and hobbies, and how have they perhaps enriched your life?
Oh yeah, now I do a lot of sports as much as I have time to. I have 3 kids, so spend as much time as I can with them, up to a certain point, of course.
What ages are they, if you don't mind me asking? What ages are your kids?
9, 12, and 13. So it's getting easier, definitely. I'm getting into the teen period, which is probably a whole set of new challenges again. But anyways, yeah, I have my routines. I do play board games. I like that a lot. Play video games when I can. I usually have like summer holiday or when there's some time off. I find like a good game and play through it. Like Elden Ring, like it's just amazing. Like going through that and The Last of Us, and then seeing the TV series afterwards, and yeah. And then I have my routines, just to work optimally as well. Usually do a workout in the morning, do yoga, some interval training, like HIIT exercises, and then meditate, and then do a cold shower. So that's kind of my standard morning ritual. And that really brings me into a focused mindset for the entire day. And like I said, health is a big interest. So I'm a vegetarian, focus a lot on food and what kind of food is healthy. And yeah.
And so therefore, how do you define success, and what does success, because I think it's a uniquely personal thing. How do you define success, and what therefore does it mean to you?
To me, it's, it's almost like what's success? What's the meaning of life? What do you want to do? Like, to me, it's, you want to leave something behind. So do something meaningful that you can be remembered for. So that's one part of it. That's why I want to build a company. I want to do something that helps society, that kind of, you do something that meaningful with your life. And I think the other part of it is, having a family, having kids. I mean, those are the people who will remember you and kind of leave some part of yourself with them in the way you live your life with them and kind of have experiences with them, teach them stuff. I mean, those are the two things that I feel are important in life.
And so in terms of, if you reflect back, I'm always a question I ask of Extrology guests, but what advice might you give your 21-year-old self?
I mean, keep following your passion and do what you believe in. I think that's, because a lot of people, and I've been in the same position where you're left with this, you have this option where like, do I want to choose the safe and known, or should I just jump in and do what I believe is it's a bit scary, but it's probably the right thing. So I think choosing that path most of the time instead of the secure and safe option, then I think that would be my advice to my 21-year-old self, but also most people. Yeah, it amazes me when you lived in a country like Thailand, which doesn't have a social safety net the same way we do here. And then still people are afraid of taking chances and starting their own company and like doing what they want to be doing. That is curious to me. Like, what do you have to lose? You'll probably find another job if you don't succeed. Just try it out. Do what you want to do. Live your life.
Interesting. And in terms of Globus, where should we point listeners? Where can listeners go to find out more?
Well, we do have a lot of stuff coming out on YouTube, on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. We're publishing a lot of interesting stuff on technology. So I'm trying to create videos and kind of go through a bit of what's out there and how does it work, especially related to staffing agencies and recruitment. And otherwise, it's the webpage. If you want to get into like what Globus is and what we do, have a look at the webpage and reach out. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a conversation and meet new people.
Fantastic. We'll put a link in the show notes, but I think I'm right in saying it's Globus.ai, isn't it? I think www.globus.ai.
Globus.ai, yeah. It's
fantastic.
The first company the first company name we did was Next Gen AI, and we just started, so we didn't afford we didn't pay for the .com domain, so we paid for the .co domain. And the first customer we got was Ladal Medical, and they worked with these mannequins for CPR training. And when we searched, when we tested nextgenai.com, what is that? And that was a company that made these AI sex dolls kind of thing. So we're like, oh no, that's so bad. Like, we just have to find a new way. So that at least instigated Globus, the search for the Globus name.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Helge, thank you. It's been great to spend time with you this morning. A fascinating conversation. I think you, arguably from my perspective, selfishly could have gone for hours, but appreciative of your time. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I wish you and your colleagues at Globus continued success. You're on a great journey. It's a fabulous product that you offer, and a really exciting time to be involved in the innovations that you are. And very much I wish you continued success. Very much look forward to watching you and your colleagues continue to flourish, and really appreciate you taking your time out to share your experiences with us here on Extrology today. Many thanks.
Thank you for having me on, and it was a very interesting conversation.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.